Hi folks, welcome to class 4 of research methods. And in this class, as the title suggests, we'll be looking at interviews in field research. So what are the methods for interviewing, what are the best practices that you can use when interviewing and also doing field research. By field research, we mean going into the field or into settings where your subjects or your phenomenon is being played out. It could be an office, it could be the actual outdoors if you're studying, say, farming practices, or it could be a hospital if you're studying a hospital. So, field in that sense has a very general meaning, and it refers to any situation where you are encountering your research question or your subjects who you're studying. And at the end of today's session, hopefully with the readings that you've had, you'll be able to understand the need and role of interviews, what are their limitations. You'll gain some understanding of how do you design an interview protocol. I will also email you some sample protocols today so you can have a look. And as we've talked in the earlier classes, you'll also understand the logic of data collection and how do you operate in the field, as well as any ethical imperatives that may exist. We are not in class, but what I would suggest you do is we are doing an exercise on this. So while you're doing your interview exercise, take a research question that you're doing and interview your subject carefully, keeping in mind the tips that Siedeman and others offer, and record this ideally and take notes extensively as you're interviewing and see how this experience plays out. See what you learn from this experience, and what are the insights you gain. Like how much of the information did you capture? What was unanswered? What did you ask the subject? So we can discuss this in class when we meet again. But for now, I hope this interview exercise is useful to you, just as a practice exercise to learn some of the nuances of interviewing, of paying attention to things that are said, things that are unsaid. So things of that kind, and asking probing questions. How do you make sure that you don't you build trust with the person you're interviewing, etc. So when you conduct interviews, here are some tools that you will use. So I've mentioned these words before. So interview protocol is any set of documents that you prepare that will help you in the interview process. So these could include the interview questions, the background to your research project, and other sort of documents which are required by the Institutional Review Board or the IRB board. So I'll send you a sample today as promised. Other important key point is your recording devices. Like how are you recording it? As in, do you have permission to record voice, video, or are you using just a pen and paper? So always ask for permission before you do this. The third important thing is coding sheet. In fact, if there is more than one person involved, you need to prepare what is called a coding sheet. So there is intercoder reliability, meaning that assuming if you assign a specific code for a certain phenomenon in your interview, the other researchers are also using it in the same sense, in the same context, so there is mutual agreement on what is it that you're studying. So we'll examine a few cases of this when we meet again. But for now, look up these concepts, and also remember that these are important. Especially the last point, the coding software. So if you're dealing with small number of interviews, then I think you don't need a coding software. But if you're examining, say, thousands of interviews or hundreds of interviews, you might need the help of a software. I mean, there is Nvivo. Some people use to gather information. People use Qualtrics as well. But we'll talk about Nvivo in a bit. So as you conducted your interview, your sample interview, pay attention to the following things. Following points, a question that I've asked. The important thing is for you to also think critically, think reflexively, and examine what did you gather from this piece of information, because everything that the person has shared with you has some insights, has a certain context, has some background story to it. So your question as an interviewer, or your effort, should be to really unravel that and bring to bear the experience, the richness of what this person or group of people have really encountered in the context of what you're asking. So also always ask yourself, what did you learn from his experience? What could have been done better, which you did not do in this specific interview? I think you can undergo training, ethical training through the IRB at Cal Lutheran. Give this a try at the link given here and click on the tab Online Learning and let me know what happens. I think you should be able to do this. This should take maybe slightly more than an hour, hour and a half, or maybe longer, depending on specific sessions. But this is well worth certifying because once you do the certification, you can actually conduct proper research and it will be valid for 5 years. You can conduct research anywhere. So I'd encourage all of you to do this. This is not required, but I'd certainly encourage you to undergo this ethical training. Switching gears now, as we talked earlier in the first class onwards, we've talked about the difference between quantitative and qualitative data, right? So as all the scholars we have studied for this week, Siedeman and others, they talk about qualitative data being rich, it being a rich source of insights, and also it answers questions of why and how. Essentially, I mean, that's the kind of question that you ask when you ask interview questions. So you're not looking directly for correlations, you're not looking to prove much, you're trying to understand how a certain phenomenon came to be. You're trying to understand why, for instance, does a certain thing happen. So in that sense, you're trying to gain insights on certain hidden phenomenon or long-term insights of a specific experience or observations. So in that sense, yes, everything is data, to answer the title of that slide. I want to quickly go through the readings. So Bernard talks about the good practices of interviewing, and what is the difference between structured, unstructured, and semi-structured interviews. I hope that came across quite clearly. And some of the good practices he mentions are worth remembering here. Anonymity, guarantee people anonymity so they can talk to you freely, so they don't get identified and get into trouble because of your way of doing research, or if you write something which others who read it might not like about what these people said. So also let the informant lead the discussion. So don't be the one who's always overdoing things. Let the person offer insights. Let the person, you need to guide them. You need to using techniques of probing, echo probing, as in sort of echoing what the person said, repeating things back to them, and just giving. Silence is also a great strategy. Just remain silent for 20 seconds. I've used this in class sometimes. It works. It works. So there's that. Siedeman, on the other hand, also argues about stories being a part of meaning-making processes and how we make sense of the world, right? Whether it be our personal narratives or professional narratives or any other phenomenon that we are studying. So the idea of meaning-making or explaining things is to really put behavior in context. So as he points out quite nicely, subjects in natural sciences cannot talk, as in if you're studying rocks or if you're studying gravity or what have you. You cannot talk, so you can experiment with them. Whereas in social sciences, human beings can talk. They can respond to you. So you can actually ask questions. You can manipulate the behavior. You can do various things to get what you want in that sense, right? So that's the main difference between positivist and constructivist ways of looking at the world as well. Key principles to keep in mind when you do interviews is always ask what is in it for them. Of course, as a researcher, you're interested in learning more and all that, but when others are sharing information with you, they spending their time, they're taking some time away from what they're doing to be with you. So always ask what is in it for them, and try to, I'm not saying compensate monetarily. If you can, that would be good, especially when you're dealing with cases where say our daily wage workers, they work for hours, 8 hours a day, and they make X amount of money. If they're taking 1 hour away from their work to be with you, they actually lose money. So these are some questions that you have to keep in mind. Also, for instance, the other key principle is do no harm, which is especially when you're dealing with populations that may be vulnerable, undocumented workers in the US, for instance, or LGBT groups or other minoritized groups, which may actually be harmed by your research. So always keep in mind that do no harm should be your guiding principle. And how you do this varies by each context. If you have specific questions, we can talk about it one-on-one. But keep these principles in mind and think about them as you plan your research. We've talked about the Tuskegee syphilis study in the first class, I believe. But here are some key points which talk about how this happened and why it happened and what's the need for IRB protocols and stuff like that. So I've again created a slide for the guiding ethical principles in terms of the risk involved for them and the benefits of the research, whether it's benefits to the field, field of scholarship, or benefits for the persons involved themselves. For instance, if you're studying undocumented workers, for example, and if your research has policy recommendations which you believe will impact state California policy or the federal policy for the better, then that risk, the benefit might outweigh the risk. So in that cases, you could justify saying, okay, this risk is worth it. And even if the subjects agree that yes, we are willing to speak, even though anonymously, but about certain subjects. So they also feel that their sharing of their stories or insights contributes to better policy making or better living conditions for those people. Then that's a good benefit. Again, look at what is the notion of justice in terms of, are you justifying, again, benefits and risks, and are they fair in terms of, are you putting undue burden on the people you're interviewing? So in terms of the typical kinds of questions, I'm sure most of you have heard these terms. Open-ended questions are questions which are, don't have a yes or no answer. Closed-ended questions are those. Did you have breakfast is an open-ended question. A closed-ended question, right? You can say yes or no. Did you like your breakfast is an open-ended question, right? That can also be a closed-ended question. But open-ended question is, what did you have for breakfast? So you have to describe, right? I had scrambled eggs, French toast, orange juice, blah blah blah, and coffee, right? Whereas hybrid questions are both that include open-ended and closed-ended questions. So in interviewing, it's good to know that you can use both, ideally hybrid questions, and in some cases you might need closed-ended questions if you need specific answers to specific questions. So we talk a little quickly about interviewing and data analysis. So I may have described this earlier. So the first thing to do in any interviewing procedure is to develop your protocol and questions. You recruit your subjects and identify who these people are that you're going to interview, right? You need to figure out who that is. You just can't go out there and start interviewing people randomly. Third step is conducting the interviews, documenting them, and then finally analyzing them. Like, how do you analyze? We'll talk about it in the next step. So I mentioned Nvivo as a software. So please watch this introductory video to Nvivo. I believe you must have a copy of the software on campus. If any one of you want to use it, please let me know. We can talk about it. In terms of actual types of analysis that you can do for your content that you gather or the interview material transcripts, here are the kinds of analysis. So you can do content analysis, discourse analysis, which is a fairly complex mechanism. I have a lot of resources on both of these. If you wish, you can talk to me. Relational analysis is again a form of content analysis. And there's a quick video here you can watch about these kinds of analysis. I won't go into too much of depth, but know that these are fairly simple mechanisms. These are not very complex ideas. So in all of these, you're basically trying to find themes or ideas, emergent ideas of processes that you think are going on, and you find ways to connect them to tell a story. That's the underlying mechanism here in all of these content analysis methods. So again, watch this video. It's very useful, and I will also be able to talk to you if you have any specific questions on how to do this. In terms of, this is the analytical framework that you use. So as I said earlier, you identify concepts or themes that emerge. You collect examples of these within the transcript that you have in front of you, and you analyze those concepts and bring them together to tell the narrative or the story. That's what I have for you this week, friends. I have a book recommendation. This is fantastic. I also found a PDF for you, so feel free to download and read it. We will have a guest speaker, Fabiola Lara, who you met in the first class. That happens to be my wife. We'll find a way to get her. She does a lot of work interviewing, and hopefully she'll be useful to you guys, for those of you who are planning to conduct interviewing as a tool for your research. So I'll see you all soon, and until then, goodbye.